let's actually start off the thing, and I'll have to try and speak a little bit faster because I don't have the time that I usually have. Okay, so, who here has played Owlboy before? Okay, so we have a good few of you. Then I don't have to talk too much about that. Excellent. So, my name is Andersen. I am a self-trained, well, mostly self-trained artist. I'm mostly known for my pixel art, I think, but I've done quite a few things. I've done advertisement. It's one of my first projects that I did. I think that was 2009. I also worked on children's cartoon shows that I don't think anyone here has ever watched. They're very popular at home, I promise. I've also done a good bit of freelance illustration. So these are some of the covers that I've done. Some of you might know those. And I have also, of course, worked on video games. Some of these are previous projects, some of them are out now. One of them is Planetoid Pioneers. I did a very nice intro. They're very thankful. But I guess the thing I'm most known for is a little project called Owlboy. Now, roughly 5 years ago, I funded a studio called D-Pad Studio. And, well, I work as an art director, and I basically do all the art for that studio. Practically everything. If you've been to the website, I unfortunately had to do that. I didn't code it, but I did that stuff. D-Pad Studio has done a number of projects. The only one I think you'll recognize from this list would be Savant Ascent. We also have that game in the mid-right, which is Project Rhapsody, which we did before we formed the studio officially, which I think was in 2005, which shows how old we are. But again, what I'm most known for is this thing, which most of you appear to have played. Now, Owlboy was an idea that I got when I was still in school. And this was kind of before the industry had really taken off. And it was before the Norwegian game industry had really shown much. We had Funcom back then, and indie development was pretty much non-existent. And more so, if you were going to make a living off of doing indie games, that wasn't really an option at all. So I got together with some friends, and I started to work with kind of hobby projects and stuff that I wanted to do on my spare time. I pitched Owlboy. We made the glorious decision of being one of the first people to use XNA for our game. We have now outlived that programming language. And the idea was that we were going to fund the studio really quick, finish Owlboy, and then go on to make all sorts of other things. And the end result was that we ended up working on Owlboy for quite some time. I think this was in, yeah, that's in 2011. They're talking about Fez not being released yet. And we actually managed to get Owlboy done last year in November, which brings the total number count to 8 years plus 11 months, so pretty much 9 years. Now, a lot of people ask, why did we actually finish this project? I mean, consider just how long of a time that is. And there's a number of reasons for that, but I think the main reason is that we felt really inspired to do this thing. We knew what the game was going to be, we knew how we had to do it, and we knew that we could present it in a way that people would find engaging. We just needed the amount of time for it. So, what's this panel about then? Well, there's kind of plenty of panels here that tell you about very intricate design decisions and how to do 3D meshes and texture work and that sort of thing. But I thought I'd mix it up a little bit and talk about, not that one, talk about how you can get inspired, how to keep that inspiration, to push through all the things you don't want to do, and then, well, finish. And I'm going to be using examples from Owlboy all through the thing, so you see how I did it, and then maybe you can put some of that in your toolbox if you want. So, how do we start? Well, I'm going to give you some quick tips on how to be inspired. Most of you already know these things, but I'm going to reiterate and use examples. So, here's how I would improve this thing. Now, most of you do this already. Have you ever seen a movie that wasn't quite that good, or a game that was kind of or a presentation with a long-haired guy that went on for too long? You can kind of use that as a jumping board to get further along with your ideas and iterate on that. My personal favorite is to play old Game Boy Color games. I do this on purpose. That era of games, the system was so difficult to develop for, and you had so many inexperienced developers that you got a lot of very unfinished ideas, and it's a gold mine to go through if you want to find things to bounce off of and find ways to iterate things on your own. Now, I should stipulate, if any of the developers for these games are in the audience, I'm not picking on you specifically, I just pulled something off of Google, so. Let's see. So, in Owlboy's case, I had two goals. One was to show pixel art as a medium. So back then, pixel art wasn't viewed very well publicly. The whole indie development thing hasn't really started up. And most people saw it as more of a not as good as 3D kind of thing. And the second was that I was playing a lot of Kid Icarus and Super Mario 3. So these are the two games I would say that inspired Owlboy more than anything else. Mario had this sort of half glide kind of thing. It wasn't quite a flying mechanic, and you couldn't quite fly along with it. And Kid Icarus had it's basically Cupid, but he couldn't fly, which felt a little limiting. It also had very open dungeons, but you couldn't really explore anything. So I wanted to change that up. And I wanted to find a way to bring that into my own game. So that's one of the reasons why you fly in Owlboy, is because I looked at Kid Icarus and I thought, what if you could fly higher? What if you could find flying islands? One of the reasons Otis is mute in the game is because I figured if islands are so far away, maybe they have their own language, and that developed to the idea of him being mute. It wasn't some sort of weird reference to Gordon Freeman. So, let's see here, what's the next one? Here's also an example of things that came from Kid Icarus. Kid Icarus was very vertical. It worked more or less like Pac-Man. If it could scroll, you could jump off the screen and pop out on the other end. But it still felt very limiting because the world felt like it had some depth to it. These are some of the design sketches we had for massively open worlds, because back then we thought if you're making a big game, it has to have massive open worlds. We have since cut these areas, or at least drastically reduced them, because we realized that there's better ways of designing games. But the open world aspect of that came from iterating upon ideas that we didn't feel like were complete. Okay, next point. What if? So this one is another one that most people do, but it requires a little bit of extra effort. So it's basically any idea that you have, and then you add a random element to it. How does that make the idea fun? Can you add something just really bizarre to something to give it that extra spice? So just an example, how about you have a giant city filled with very dandy dinosaurs that talk? That's exactly what I did in Owlboy. So we had this city, Advent. We had a small settlement at the start of the game, and the idea was that you were going to come out to the later parts of the game and you were going to say, like, now I get to explore the big city. Now I get to go into all the shops. There was a theater in there was a school, you could buy items, all that good stuff that you get in your usual RPGs. And to spice it up a little bit, I added dinosaurs. Keep in mind, these are 10 years old, so not so good now. But again, when we continued working on the game, we figured that on one hand, it was a monumental undertaking to make a giant sprawling city to explore and all that. But it turned out that in context of the story, it was much more impactful to lose that city. That you got a brief glimpse of it, and then the entire thing got destroyed. So we ended up doing that in the game instead, but I still kept the old designs. One of them was a sort of wonky looking velociraptor I'm not sure why I said he was a velociraptor, but that's kind of what I based him on. Not sure you can even see that. I mean, he has horns. But this guy stuck around for quite some time. And at some point, we needed a way to teach the player how to do a dodge roll. And I kind of just dug him out of my old archives and looked at ways of incorporating him. We ended up kind of liking him. And because of this, because he ended up having kind of a big part of the game, they became the Bogwins, which are kind of a staple of Owlboy at this point. Now, I mentioned that they were based on velociraptors, but the team kept saying that they looked sort of like a mix between a penguin and a cow. So we gave their name by mixing bovine with penguin, so that's where their name Bogwins, just in case you're curious. And I want to address this now. Back when I designed these guys, I had no idea what a prinny was. So the comparison is unfortunate. I should have picked a different color for them. So another thing to get you guys inspired, that looks cool. Now, this is basically just finding games that you like and then dissecting what you like about them. Either if it comes from a mechanical standpoint or if it comes from just a feeling that you get. And I realized that saying feeling sounds like a very mushy kind of thing to do, but sometimes just getting the feeling of what you enjoy about something is a very difficult task. So just as an example from Owlboy, one of the things that inspired us a lot for doing our tutorial levels were Mega Man X and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Now, both these games did tutorials very well. Mega Man X, for example, throws you in a pit very early so that you're forced to learn the jumping mechanic to get out of the pit. They also put enemies in certain placements, so you'll have to learn how to do certain moves in order to get around them. Now, when it comes to Owlboy, there were a lot of people saying that, well, the start of the game had kind of a slow tutorial, and that was kind of on purpose. We had a lot of focus testing, and it turns out that most people just didn't understand our throw mechanic, so we had to really hammer in how that worked. But that was literally the only place that we did that. The rest of the game, we permeated with the same kind of design decisions that we got from Mega Man X. For example, reusing, are you gonna jump? There you go. Reusing hints for certain mechanics right before you're about to use them. In this case, you have a stone that looks exactly like the boss, and the only way to destroy it is to spin on it, which is exactly how you defeat the boss. You have to spin on it to get the shield off. So, yep, I lost my notes. There we are, okay. Okay, next one, new experiences. Now, this one is going to be something that you're not going to feel the effects of right away. And a lot of you are going to argue that I don't have the money or I don't have the time for this, but I would really recommend it. It's basically just taking yourself to a new environment that you're not familiar with. And simply by doing that, you're going to absorb a lot of new things that you weren't aware of previously. During Owlboy's development, I had to break a lot of comfort zones. I started dating for the first time in the US. I'm Norwegian, so that was a big thing. And I wasn't used to dealing with someone that had different interests than mine, so I had to go along and join into fabric shops and that sort of thing. And it turns out, when you put in those environments, you get a lot of very neat ideas. I think I scribbled an entire notebook of new ideas just by going in and looking at plushies. Here's a very simple example if I'm babbling too much. This is Mandolin's house from the start of the game. For most of you, it should be obvious that I had just visited Japan right before this, but this wasn't intentional. I think this was drawn maybe 5 years afterwards, but it was something I had internalized. There were no means to incorporate anything Japanese into the style, but because I had that, I knew certain architectural elements. So just because I'd been placed in that environment, I internalized some things and I could use them for projects later. So, next one, be bored. I like to describe being bored as letting your mind wander and figure out what it actually wants to do. Not everyone has the luxury of doing this, of course. Most of us are very busy, but it is, if you read most authors' books, they will tell you that their big epiphany was when they were on a bus, or they were on a train, or somewhere where they were just mundanely staring at something without thinking. This is really important stuff, and if you don't get a moment to yourself, you're not going to be able to internalize and think about all those things that you've thought about previously. Don't overdo it, though. That's how you become a hermit. So, I've talked a lot of nonsense about ways to get inspired, so let's put that inspiration to use. Next part is also going to seem like I'm talking down to you, but I'm really not. Make stuff. Most of us are terrible at this. We are not good at just starting a thing and then iterating on it. Usually we start making design documents, we think about the mechanics before we even started looking at the program. A lot of these things are pretty much a barrier to continuing your work. I'll give you 2 examples for this, just to hammer the point across. Before we finished completing Owlboy, we made another project called Savant Ascent. Now, a lot of people kind of felt like this project came out of nowhere and like, where on earth did you come up with this idea? Well, the truth is, this was actually an old project. Joe Remy, who's sitting there filming me right now, made a little prototype thing that looked like this. And it was basically just sitting there, flailing your arms and making something random. The idea here was that enemies were coming in waves, in little circle patterns, and you can change out your gun. Now, later, we ended up reiterating that and turning that into a collaboration with the music artist Savant. And as you can see, it's the same basic concept, but we iterated it a bit further. You could have new power-ups. You could jump between 2 points. It was vertically scrolling to give you that feeling of speed at the same time. So a lot of that simply came from this doofy doodle that Joe did. On my end, I was looking through my old sketchbooks because I didn't actually remember this, and I found this guy. This was just some random doodle that I made maybe, I'm not even sure how many years ago it was now, maybe 8. The idea was just that I have an owl that's based on a barn owl. Let's just make a snowy owl, see how that turns out. No basic ideas about that. And it turns out, from this, I made one of the most important characters in Owlboy, Solus, which became the main focal point of pretty much the entire story. So, again, this was not pre-planned. We had no design documents doing this. It was just a bunch of doodles that you started to interpret. All right, so next up is, what do you actually do in this game? So a lot of you will probably ask me, what is Owlboy? And I'll give you the standard pitch that I give to everyone. And I'm gonna have to read this ad verbatim because it's gonna be hard for me. So it's usually going to be that it's a game about flying, exploring, and conquering dungeons. Sounds pretty straightforward, but that's not actually what the game is about. More accurately, let's say I describe the combat. It is, in combat, the game is about careful positioning in a space with preset location encounters using twin-stick shooting mechanics while managing several switchable weapon types and different effects while disarming abilities. That's what the game is actually about. And it doesn't sound quite as pleasing. These are the small things that you have to figure out while you're developing the game, and oftentimes it helps you to figure those out early. Sometimes you're just doing development boxes. Someone has shown you a sketch. Don't base it on the sketch. Just make some really strange, small, iterative things. It's the difference between thinking, I have a really cool game where you punch people in the face, like that. But if you expand that thought and instead say, I want jumping, standing, and ducking attacks to count as different hit areas on the body, that's what leads to this. Very different thought processes. Let's see here. And these are some of my own development sketches. had nothing to do with designing pretty things. It's just going through small interactive little dillies that you're going to do while playing the game. These things are vital. All right. Another good technique, interpret the mess you've made. So let's say that your project is kind of a jarbled mess of sketches and programming language and that sort of thing, but the foundation is solid. You kind of have a rough idea of what you want. One of the things you can do is just simply to interpret what those jarbled things are. Not to go by your preset design documents, just look at the image and try to figure out what does that look like. I gave an example a little while ago saying if you have two boxes that you now have moving towards each other, try to figure out what they're thinking as this is happening. I'll do a brief example. Here is the first sketch I did of a dungeon in Owlboy. This was, I think, the second thing that I did for the game. Now, it looks a lot different than the finished version, and that's because all those interpretations that I did was based on the small symbolisms and trying to figure out where all these things went in this one image. Now, for example, I drew this symbol a lot. I had no idea what that was. I drew this symbol a lot. No idea what that was. And it turns out that that became the cornerstone of what this entire project was meant to be. If you look at one of the final images that you get in the game, this explains the entire story. These images are now a prominent part of the design structure. These are now incorporated into the story. They're incorporated into the way you play. All of this was interpreting just old sketches. Let's see here. So, how to get the most out of your work. This is not really a necessary part of all this, but I'm going to go through it in case we have students here that want some brief brush-ups on how to do basic design work. So I'm going to run through some ways on interpreting defining traits. So when I started designing the game, Otis wasn't an owl. He was a lot of different things. I just knew that I had something that was going to fly and probably pick things up, and that he was going to land on islands. So I started out with this. It was some sort of insect guy with wings. Most of the base mechanics were not established, and I think I spent about a month going through this entire design tree. At first, I was going to settle on the flying dog. Then Okami was released. Yes, that's how old it was, so I decided to scrap that. Moving further down, I went away from the dog thing and looked more at seagulls. Maybe it was like a fox that had a little cape that he flew with, that sort of thing. And I kept iterating on concepts where you had some sort of cloak device and some sort of bird-like feature. This was a very long and arduous process, especially back then when I had no experience. But what I finally ended up with was this guy. Now, this is not a good design. You can see the base elements of the final character here, but he has eyebrow tufts, he has some sort of neck thing that I haven't quite figured out what it is. He has some sort of checkerboard pattern. He has just normal hands, and I don't see any loopable patterns or repeatable shapes. Then I scaled them down. This is another way to quickly iterate some of your designs. If you're designing your characters full size, sometimes you end up being stuck on details. I decided to try and sprite him first because things are small and you have to point out the things that you want to see. So in this case, you can see that he's developed more of those weird eyebrows. He has his, what do you call those? Sideburns, that's the one. He also has more of a neck fluff thing, and his cape now covers more of his body. But this still isn't the finished version. Then I took that and I scaled it up. This is the final design. Now, some of the things here I should mention. If you're looking for shape language, it's more satisfying when you have shapes that repeat throughout the character. If you look at the hair, the eyebrows, the sideburns, the tips of his cloak, and his feet, they all share the same points. Also, his neck fluff thing and the tips of the top of his boot are the same shape, more satisfying. Let's see here. You can also remove traits to see if it looks weird. If you take something away and you feel like it makes the character lack something, then you can put them back and accentuate it more. I also want to jump back into this for a split second. This is more for the more hardcore fans because I know they'll appreciate it. If you look over here, you'll see it was kind of a weird design Otis ended up being at last. I also realized that this is what ended up being Twig in the game. Which is one of the starting antagonists. So technically, Otis and Twig are the same person. It's a little strange. Another thing I want to point out really quick, defining colors. It's usually more satisfying to have a color that repeats at least once within a design. Here's Otis. Here are his color blocks. You can see that his hair, his cloak, and his feet all share the same colors, as do his eyebrows and his sweater thing. And I purposely made his pants and his face to look the same because it makes it stand out less. The main part that's popping out are his gloves. Those are the unique color. And the reason I did that is because most of the game you'll be flying around and you'll be holding things and you need to see those gloves when you do. But I also made sure that when he runs, he has two little relics on his side that are colored in gray so that it doesn't feel too jarring when you do that. Let's see here. Another thing here is consistency. Now, all of these areas seem very different, I'm sure. You have the blue water area and you have the tropical green area and the lava and all of that. But in actuality, all of these share the same palette. Now, I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to limit myself to using a certain amount of colors, but it adds to consistency. All of this is based on the first image that I made for the game. Now I'm going to be talking a little bit about sticking to your vision. Now, this is going to be different for everyone, and I'm not going to claim that you need to finish what you start. Most of you probably have ideas that you're really passionate about, but might actually not work out. But I know that actually feeling that drive is one of the biggest problems. Usually we sit around for months, if not years, developing a project, and eventually you'll lose hope in what you're doing or you'll hit financial trouble. And I feel like the biggest motivator is feeling that passion for what you're doing and finding that one thing that you really want to complete. There's a lot of things that you're gonna get yourself into. Sometimes a project is detrimental to your income. You simply can't continue. Likely, if you work too long, your spare time will vanish. You'll have less time to hang out with your friends. It might actually be the case that your project is not very good. It might turn out that the particular market you're aiming for doesn't exist or is no longer interested in your project. Things might change halfway through development and continued work is not possible. And it might be that you need a second job to keep things afloat. We've gone through all of this during our development. However, I want to say that I still find it worth it. First of all, creativity is a process. No one's going to make something great on the first go, and you're going to face multiple failures before you achieve great things. The main tool I've found to overcome this is the passion from the rest of my team to complete these hurdles. I taught myself how to make pixel art. I taught myself how to use Photoshop. I did not go to school for those things, and all of that was for the main reason of completing a project that I believed about a lot. I wanted to finish with a little anecdote, because I feel like there was a moment where I realized how important this aspect of development was to me and the rest of the team. So about 2 years ago, we were interviewed for a short documentary on our development. This thing is not online, unfortunately. It was a school project. But they asked how we felt about the project at that time. And I've made no secret that I've been struggling with depression for pretty much my entire life. And at that point, I think I was at the lowest point where I was in my entire life. And my answer was to apologize to my team. And I remember after we saw the finished cut of this, they had asked the question of why I apologized to the rest of the team, and they told me I was stupid. That they loved what they were doing, and they believed in this project so much they didn't care. And about, I don't even know how long later that was, but on November 1st, we put this thing up on Steam and hit the launch button. Didn't actually work out. We couldn't see if it was actually uploaded, so we had to go to the only computer in the entire office that didn't have the game installed and download it. And after about 30 minutes of waiting, we could confirm that it was the latest version. This was the reaction to that. That was 9 years of built-up anguish and frustration in one moment. And I know, it's not a very flattering photo. It isn't. But I would say, despite all of that, because people keep asking me, so I'll just do this on stage right now, it was completely worth it. I would actually do it again. And it was the inspiration that I felt and the motivation from the rest of the team that made us get to that point. So, if I had to leave you with anything, listen to your own head and go do what you're going to do. Thank you for your time.